Good morning and welcome. My name is Eva Fiallos Diaz, and I am the Rural Project Coordinator with the Florida Council Against Sexual Violence. I've met a number of you, and some of you I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, and look forward to one of our next events. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy advocate lives to join us to create space for talking about how to better serve our adolescent survivors and their loved ones today. We came about this topic for a number of reasons, but one of them being that we recognize that this isn't work that all of our centers have done, and it is one where we are trying to provide accessibility for, especially in rural areas where there are less services available. We want families to feel like they can come to our centers and receive the same services that they would if they were maybe trying to access services at a CAC that may not be readily available in their own county. And so, to that sort of um, in that vein, I guess I should say, we had conversations about some of the strengths of our programs, and our current program is based. One of our current programs under the Rural Grant is based out of the umbrella of a CAC, and if you're not familiar with the term CAC, it stands for Child Advocacy Center. Child advocacy centers, Melissa will go into more depth to kind of explain what they are, but they tend to serve our minor survivors and victims of sexual assault. Melissa Collins from Gulf Coast Sexual Assault Program will be leading in the following rural webinar, which, as you can see on the screen, hopefully, is called Serving Adolescent Survivors and Secondary Survivors Who Are Non-Offending Caregivers. The webinar will focus on Gulf Coast's approach to providing services to the aforementioned populations, specifically in the North Florida rural counties of Jackson, Calhoun, Washington, and Holmes. Melissa has served as a victim advocate for 2 years, and prior to that, she was a case coordinator for Guardian Ad Litem. She has additionally been designated a victim practitioner by the Office of Attorney General. So we're happy to have you here today, and I'm going to hand it over to Melissa.
Thanks, Eva. Good morning, everybody. Thank you guys for joining us today. As Eva mentioned, I'm Melissa Collins. I've been a sexual assault victim advocate with Gulf Coast Sexual Assault Program for about a year and a half. But just after I kind of thought I was getting the hang of being an advocate for sexual assault, we expanded our services to, well, we were previously just serving adults. We expanded our services to all ages of sexual assault. It was a little bit of a shock for all of us, but being under the umbrella of the CAC, it gave us a unique opportunity, and we already had a lot of things in place that we kind of incorporated from the CAC to better serve our families. I started my career in social work because I really wanted to help people. I wanted people to know that somebody was there that didn't give up for them and would keep fighting for them. We all know this isn't an easy job. I say just the sheer number of times people ask me how we do our job is very exhausting. But we all want to make a difference, and we're all making a difference. Even if it's for a short period of time, we're making a difference. Our agency has only started in October of 2015. So just 2 short years later, we expanded our services for all survivors. So we now serve adults, adolescents, children's non-offending caregiver in the rural communities of Northwest Florida. So we want to thank OVW for their support of this project and our webinar, and the Florida Coalition Against Sexual Violence, and Eva for her input in helping me get this together today. So here's my contact information. Anytime you guys have any questions or anything, feel free to email me. I will do the best I can to answer it, or to find somebody else that might know your answer. I work mainly in Holmes and Washington counties in Northwest Florida. We're located 50 miles north of Panama City Beach, but we tell everybody it's a different world up here. We're mostly dirt roads, and we're sort of famous for our possum festival. So this quote really spoke to me. It seems to be a lot of what I see with our victims. Often it's not the initiating trauma that creates seemingly unsurmountable pain, but the lack of support thereafter. So we want to be that support for our clients. So a little bit about the CAC and the system before the CAC. It's a little recap of what our victims used to experience before the CAC. This is Kayla's story. So Kayla's being abused, say at home, by not her mother, but say her stepfather. And she tells her teacher. So her teacher turns around and she calls the principal and she tells the principal. She may tell the school nurse. So then the school gets together and they call the abuse hotline and the police. So the police or DCF would come and talk to her again at the school, and then they would take her to the hospital. Once she's taken to the hospital, she's going to be probably interviewed by a nurse, a doctor, and then she's examined. Then she would go and talk to a detective. She would tell her story once again. After the detective talks to her, the CPI from DCF would talk to her. She tells her story again. Then she goes to talk to the state attorney, a lawyer that needs to find out just a little bit more information. So she tells her story again. And then she starts to work with a therapist. We can see how frustrating this can be for a 9-year-old, a 12-year-old. It could even be frustrating for me, someone who's experienced trauma by someone that they loved or even a stranger, to have to go tell their story 9, 10 times can get very frustrating. It can also give defense attorneys a lot of chances to put doubt, because by the time you tell a story 9 times, what are the chances it's going to be exactly the same 9 times? And all these people are writing stuff down and taking that it's going to be presented at some point. So this system gave a lot of opportunities to fail our victims. So this is kind of our new system. This is the system that we have today at the Gulf Coast Children's Advocacy Center, and I'm sure a lot of centers throughout the state, that gives Kayla a child-friendly one-stop location to tell her story and to receive support. So in this model, Kayla has told someone like her mother or the school teacher that she's being abused by her stepfather. The mother calls the police, and the police calls CPT and arranges a time and date for her to come to the Children's Advocacy Center for an interview. So when she comes for her interview, she will go to a family waiting room with her mom, where she'll meet a family advocate, and then she'll go and she'll have her interview with the CPT investigator. You see from the little graphic there that while she's having her interview in that bottom left corner, well, that's her therapy program, sorry. While she's having her interview with CPT, it will be observed by DCF, police, the state attorneys. So they don't need to then turn around and ask her questions. They can have the CPT ask her those questions, and she doesn't have to talk to 3 other people. So that right there narrows down 4 people to 1 person. While she's doing that, her mother's in a family-friendly room with the family advocate, getting the support and guidance to help her and to help her learn how to help Kayla. If Kayla needs a medical exam, that's also performed at the CAC by CAC staff. So as Eva said, we're blessed to be one of, I believe, 3 sexual assault programs that is under the umbrella of a Children's Advocacy Center in the state. Our program is under the Gulf Coast Children's Advocacy Center, and we serve 6 counties in Northwest Florida, 4 of those being rural counties. Being under the CAC gives us the opportunity to not only meet the child very close to the beginning of the investigation, but also to prepare our facilities and advocates to better serve them before they even come to our facility. So we want coming to the CAC to be the best experience it can be. I was once told when I was doing my training as a firefighter that we never meet people on their best day, and that's kind of how I feel about the CAC too. Kids are not usually very happy. You know, it's not a great day in their life to come and talk about the abuse that they've had. So we work really hard to create a safe and inviting building and rooms for the child and family. Our offices are located in each of the 6 counties that we serve and have really awesome age-appropriate facilities for our survivors. These are some pictures of our office in Panama City, Florida. We want the environments that they see from the time they arrive to be welcoming. Our offices in each county provide a huge asset for our families. 25 miles might not seem like much, but in communities that have no public transportation, and many times the non-offending caregiver is left with no transportation, having those offices in each county really makes it easier for our clients. So we serve the 4 rural counties, like I said, which is Jackson, Calhoun, Washington, and Holmes. We also serve Bay and Gulf County. We have 6 advocates working in 6 counties. But one thing we have identified and we're trying to work on is giving more, our family waiting rooms right now are geared more towards younger children. And we would like to incorporate some more adolescent rooms so the older kids feel more welcomed and they feel more comfortable. And that's something that our management supervisors have been working on. You guys, if you have any questions or comments, please let me know and I'll kind of take a break so you guys can talk too. I'd like for this to be sort of interactive.
Melissa, I think that it would be nice for them to hear about, what's happening with the adolescents in your county, as a result of how they feel, in the center's environment and office setting. I think it was a story that like Sonia told, but it's also one that you kind of, and I think it was really meaningful because I think it could be very validating to hear it.
Which one was it? I'm sorry. Do you
About like so.
remember?
Yeah. I think you mentioned how your one need that you've identified is
Oh,
that the environment needs to be more adolescent friendly, and so like the story behind that, like why it came about that. Um,
okay. I know one of our staff members, when she was a teenager, she actually was brought into a CAC to do an interview, and she just commented it wasn't very inviting. She felt like it was mainly for kids and that she didn't want to be treated like a little kid. She was 14, 15 years old, and she ended up just walking out of her CPT and not disclosing any of her abuse. So then the investigation ended right there, where we feel like it's a little better today, but maybe if we had a room where they felt like it was kind of catered to them, that they would feel a little bit more at home, a little bit more at ease with sharing their stories before they get into the CPT rooms. The CPT rooms are pretty neutral. They're not necessarily like they're kid friendly, but I don't think like our waiting rooms, I think, are the one issue we were talking about, trying to make those a little bit more for teenagers, maybe a gaming system, just stereo, maybe some magazines, little things where they felt more welcome.
Thank you. I think that's awesome, and I think the other kind of like challenge that we discussed was that because they know that going in, like they want to feel like not only that the environment is authentic, but that the individual that they're going to be with is also very authentic. And so that safe, inviting kind of space also includes like the individuals. And so that
Mhm.
sometimes we have to shift, like we get used to kind of talking to younger children one way, and we forget that our adolescents don't want us to talk to them that way, even though they are very young, right? Like, so that
Right.
age appropriate also means shifting the way that you use your language around the adolescent. And so often, what you guys shared is that if you know that it's an individual who may not want to come in, that it may cause like you to shift the way that you get the interview earlier on in the process.
Yes, body language is important. The way you talk to them, those are all like very important from the minute they walk in the door, because they're very scared. The kids are scared. The parents are scared because at some point, usually, unless it's just a law enforcement only case, DCF has become involved. The parents think DCF is going to take their child. If law enforcement is involved, a lot of them are scared of law enforcement. They're scared they're going to get arrested because their child was assaulted. Most of the time, that's not the case. Most of the time, the parents are protective. Like we're talking about, most of our parents are not offending caregivers. But it's very intimidating for these people that, we go in these places day after day. It's our job. We're in, we're out. We really don't think much more about walking in that door than you do any other place you go. But these people have never been here before. They completely are scared to walk in, that, like I said, that somebody's going to take their child, they're going to arrest them, they're going to arrest their child. If it was A lot of our cases now are child on child, where it's like a 15 and 17-year-old. They're scared their children are going to be arrested as well as the perpetrator. It's a very scary time when you walk into a place like this, when you know you're coming for an interview and you know law enforcement's involved, and you know the power that those two agencies have. So to kind of diffuse that and make these people feel at home is really my number one goal when they first get there. And like I said, that starts with creating the environments and making it convenient for them. Our communities are pretty large. I think Washington County has 800 miles of roads. 600 miles of those are dirt roads. So a lot of times just to get to Chipley, which is the closest town for a lot of my clients, it's like a 10 or 15-minute drive. And then if you'd ask them to go again, like to Marietta, that's 2 towns over, that'd be a 35-minute drive. So working on all that ahead of time, is very important.
So Melissa, we had a question from Catherine. She said, "So why not add a separate room that has a teen room feel?" And I responded that that's what we're looking. That's what you guys are looking at doing in Panama City. But we understand that the realities in rural counties is that often it's it may be one office, right? Or it might be a lot of the rural programs that I talk to are literally sharing space with other programs that are not the sexual assault program in their area. And so I think that is one of the challenges. How do we make the space inviting to a teen? And if that's the limitation, right? If we have an office space that is not going to be a comfortable space for them, then do we have any partners in the community that have spaces that are more inviting to those teenagers? And so in Leon County, we're definitely not rural. But I will say that we do have community centers that are often already set up to be more inviting to teens. And so maybe it's identifying what spaces in your community are more inviting to those teens, whether it be a bowling alley or, even if it has to be at the library or something like that.
Right. And we're working in our rural communities right now. The picture that you see is of the CAC that's a standalone facility in Panama City. Our rural communities, we have our CPT officers are co-located with DCF. So we don't actually have designated rooms, but we are working in both locations to acquire larger offices that will give us the opportunity to do a teen room. I believe for sure in Marietta, and possibly we're opening a CPT beside our office, beside our sexual assault office in the small town of Bonifay, which has the rodeo every year, guys. And we've talked about actually doing like a room over there, but then bringing them to our office because it's more geared towards adults, and letting them come over here because it's just next door. It's literally like 5 steps between the 2 offices. So we're working on it. It's just literally a logistics issue right now, in that our agency across the board in our 6 counties is expanding, and we are so grateful for that, but it does leave us a little bit of limitations on adding new rooms like that. So the way that we work with our agency is prior to that scheduled CPT interview, our advocates do a pre-CPT staffing with whoever's available at the time. Normally it's going to be the law enforcement, that'll be the detective that's working the case, the CPT or the DCF investigator. So we'll all meet in the CPT case coordinator's office and we'll discuss what the allegations are. They provide us with a copy of the FISFIN if it's a DCF. That kind of that gives us the demographics. It's really important to us, me and the other advocate were talking about this yesterday, that we at least get a name to go on, to walk out into the lobby and greet that family, that we at least know who's bringing them, their name, and the child's name. I can't make my questions bigger to see the question. I see there's one, but I can't see it.
So
Eva, can you see it?
Yes, I can. So Stephanie asked, how do we shift the concept of this being a scary experience into an empowering one that people want to walk into? Um, that's a difficult one because I feel like so many of the kids that I've dealt with, and not in this particular setting, but working through a school for at-risk girls in Leon County specifically, did not want to be there. They felt like they were being forced into a situation that they didn't want to be in, and whether or not that was the best decision for them, they did not have a choice, right? And so it is scary when you feel like something already happened to you that was out of your control, and now you're not being you're not being allowed the room to make decisions. And so I think that's one way, is that when we are working with the non-offending caregivers, we really need to convey to them what it takes to allow this individual to be their own individual, but and also how that um, kind of enables their healing. And so painting it from the perspective of them always having choices, even if it feels like, okay, my choices are limited, at least you get a choice. And so if we can get the non-offending caregiver, whether that be the parent or grandparent or, an aunt or whoever, allowing that person to be involved in the process of like, okay, how are we going to address the healing, and how are you going to make room for both the advocates to be able to build this alliance with the child, and knowing that we are also aligning with you. And so I think um, that goes a long way when the parent or caregiver feels like you're not pushing them to the side, that this isn't about excluding them. It's about giving the child the room that they need to do the healing that they need to do. And so, but you're also taking care of that non-offending caregiver. Does that? Do you have something that you want to add to that, Melissa? Like so.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of it to me comes from when you first meet them, letting them know that, they're really in control. Our CPT does a great job of reminding them, the interviewer does, when they come out. They will explain to them, and I'll go into this a little bit more later in the presentation, but they kind of explain to them that they're in control of the interview. If there's anything that they don't want to talk about, they don't have to talk about it. It's completely up to them. So they give them a little bit of that power back. And I know recently I had a deposition where it was a 16-year-old girl whose mother's paramour had been touching her, and the defense attorney kept harping on her, well, why didn't you report this as soon as it happened? And she looked at him and she said, well, because it was my decision. If I wanted to report and I wanted to go through this, it's a lot to go through. So she kind of stood up to him, and he's like, well, your mother knew. Why didn't she report it? And she said, well, I'm 16. My mother talked to me about the choices to do it. So it's hard for them to understand that these kids are old enough to make some decisions, and there's legal ramifications to not reporting and stuff, but these kids want their voice too, and sometimes it's difficult to make all the different players understand that. So like we kind of said, we can't change what happened to them, but we want them to feel supported from the minute they walk in. So the way that we work after that pre-staffing CPT, the advocates will walk out and greet the family, just like welcome by name, introduce themselves, ask them if they have any questions. That's when we start trying to build a rapport with them and start building that healthy relationship with that child or teenager and the non-offending, to let them know, this is how a healthy relationship works, and here's what we're here to do for you. Like, I am your advocate, and I will ask the teenagers, do you know what an advocate means? Do you know what advocacy is? And I kind of tell them that's somebody that fights for you and is on your side. So we go out there, we greet them, talk to them. If they're in one of our interview rooms, we only have like 3 chairs. Sometimes you'll walk out there and there'll be grandma and aunt and mom, and the child's sitting on the floor. So if the child's sitting on the floor, I sit down on the floor with them just to get to their level. If they're in a chair, I try to kneel down just to talk to them. I try to make sure that I ask everybody in the room, like the non-offending caregivers and the child, do you have any questions? Is there anything you're concerned about today? And let them know that this is your interview. So we're here to help you, but we want to know kind of what you want to do. So we'll introduce ourselves, we'll kind of explain our role, and then our agency, we let them know, I work for the sexual assault program. I'm under the CAC. The CAC also has a CPT team. That's your interviewer you're going to talk to. And one thing that we try to do is make sure that law enforcement or DCF, whoever is going to investigate the case, has been working, that they're kind of already in the back and they don't walk in front of the family. Because 2 of our locations, the little room that they sit in is right off the entryway. So try to make sure that they're already back there. So if that's an intimidating factor for them, that's been eliminated. They're already in the back, the door's closed. But CPT will introduce themselves to them. They'll let them know that they're in control of the interview. They'll also reassure them after they do let them know that there's cameras in the room and they're being recorded, and they tell them the reason for that is because they can't remember everything that is said, and they will not take notes while they're in there, just so they can focus on them. So they'll let them know that that recording is not available to everybody. Anybody like teachers, mom, dad, anybody that wants to know, the judge is the only one that can release that. So sometimes that makes the kids feel a little bit better about what's going on. A lot of times, most of the time, I guess I should say, CPT will take the non-offending caregivers in the back and start out their forensic interview with them. That's to get some background information and find out, family demographics or what's going on in the case, any concerns that the parents have, any questions that they have that they don't want to ask in front of the child. That also gives us a chance to sit with the teenagers or the children and just talk to them. Most of the time I try to direct the conversation to anything else that I can tell about the kid. If they have basketball shoes on or a jersey or something like that, just trying to talk to them, make them feel at home. I will ask them after the caregivers leave the room if they have any more questions, because a lot of times they do, but they don't want to say it in front of their parents. A lot of our teenagers especially are trying to shield their parents from the abuse or from having to deal with it. They feel bad. They don't want to carry that burden over to their parents. When they do the forensic interview, they kind of start out with like a little meet and greet where they talk to them, kind of like I did, about things totally separate from the abuse, and then they lead into the abuse. There's a lot of different requirements for their doing their CPT that I don't know about, honestly. But I do know that at the end of it, they try to turn it back to something besides the abuse. What are you going to do the rest of the day? Are you excited you got to miss school today? Do you like school? Try to end it on some positive note other than the abuse that they're there to talk about. When they get done, normally we're either still out there with the caregivers talking to them, or we're waiting on the victim to walk out. We'll walk out with them. We have snacks in our offices. They're just little goldfish and Kool-Aids. A lot of times with the teenagers, I'll joke, I know you're not in preschool, but some goldfish and Kool-Aid. I still like goldfish and Kool-Aid. And that kind of puts them a little bit more at ease, gives them just a chance to kind of catch their breath before they have to walk back out there to their parents. So that's kind of how the CPT goes. We all know being a kid is really hard, that they're already dealing with so much. I have 2 teenagers, a 13 and an 18-year-old, and they're completely different, but they're also completely different from how I grew up. There's things that they're worrying about that I may have thought about when I was a teenager, but it's huge for teenagers this day and age, like finding their identity. We all know teenagers are very moody. They worry about fitting in. And some of them, when they've dealt with this trauma or they've had trauma, they start pushing boundaries. They revert to childish behaviors. There's just a lot going on with them. So one of the goals that I have when I meet a teenager, I like teenagers, but is to really start building a healthy relationship and modeling appropriate behavior with them. Letting them talk, letting them ask questions, showing them, how to do that. And that kind of starts from the minute you meet them when they walk in the doors. It's showing them some respect and acknowledge that they have feelings and that you understand they have feelings and you're there to help them. It's a little bit about what we do while our survivor is back for their CPT. We have paperwork, like I'm sure most of you do. So while the survivor is completing their interview with CPT, we sit with the caregivers. I start out with, we have a family demographics paper. It basically is who is mom, who is dad, who does the child live with? Are there siblings in the home? Is grandma in the home? Anybody else in the home? Kind of find out the demographics and the dynamics. So that kind of gives me an idea too of what their support system is. If grandma lives in the home and usually mom will mention, oh, she's really close to grandma or she doesn't get along with her sisters, something like that gives me an idea of their support system. The next paper that I normally do with them is a consent for services. I explain to them that my services are free and confidential. So, the consent outlines all that. So I ask them to read that and sign that. And then we have a release of information because I refer back to, everything's confidential with us. And that this release of information will allow me to release information, but it'll also allow me to gather information like your police report and like communication with the state attorney's office. We also have some resource handouts that we give to our clients when we see them that first time. A lot of times the non-offending caregiver will start to discuss, why they're there. And I just kind of listen and be a sounding board to them with that. We also have started doing something called the ACE survey, and that's the Adverse Childhood Experience Survey. And that gives us an idea of, what the parents have been through and if there's anything that we can help, the parents go through. A lot of times, I'm sure you guys have ran into this, you start talking to the non-offending caregiver and come to find out they were a victim of sexual assault. And they'll tell you, this experience is reminding me of my trauma, or I need help with this. So we kind of try to gather all that information. It's a little overwhelming at times. So a lot of times during that initial intake there at CPT, I don't push like safety planning on them. I just give them a little bit of safety planning. I'll talk about that in just a minute, but give them my card. I try to, when I first meet them, give them the card and let them know there's a hotline number on there and my cell phone number is on there. So if they need anything, to let me know. And I try to do that again at the end. We also have a checklist of just different assessments, that we, like the ACE survey or the resource. And then we have a needs assessment too, like what needs does this family have? What do we need to do to follow up with them?
So I have a question coming in from Stephanie, so I'm going to wait till she's done typing that in. And in the meantime, I did find an online version of the ACE score questionnaire that I have also uploaded to the handout section. So you should see that on the panel on your right. Under handouts, there should now be 3 of 5, and one of them is finding your ACE score. And so that's something that you can do yourselves, and you can also do when you're providing crisis intervention or when you've built, I think it's better to do it when you've built a little bit of rapport, obviously, with your teenager or with the non offending caregivers. Okay, so here's the question from Stephanie. She says, a thought came to mind, the difference between saying, if you don't want to speak, it's okay, or speak as much or as little as you want, versus the more you speak, the more you will heal, let go, feel empowered, feel like yourself. They still always have the option to do what they want. In one instance, they are led by the notion that not speaking is okay, which it is, but it is to their detriment, I believe, versus being led with the idea that they are in a place of control over their story and not the other way around. And so I think that's beautifully put. And
Yes.
we're going to also have another a webinar on but I can't believe I'm sorry, I can't remember if it's the 26th. Well, at the end we do have that date for you guys, where we'll have somebody who speaks a little bit more to healing and what the different methodologies that you can use for healing. And I think one of the most beautiful art therapeutic tools that I found was this idea of creating a collage where you allow teenagers to retell their story and however they want to. And so it's called News Life Story. And so essentially they create what looks like a newspaper and tell their own story. And the idea is that on the left side of the column, they're kind of telling what happened to them in their own words, and then on the right they kind of shift the story so that they can kind of change how it ends, like, because that's the thing, is that we can't change what happened, but we can change what happens to us from here on in some ways. We recognize that some families and some teenagers are going to have more difficulties doing that, but yes, controlling your narrative is one thing that you do have some control over. So again, that was just very beautifully put.
That's very awesome. It's a very good point. So going back to like the intake, one of the next things that I try to do is just do a little bit of safety planning. Just start, really assess for immediate dangers, and what they're facing at that time. It can be very challenging with teens, just with social media out there. It just adds a whole nother level of safety. And a lot of times what the teens understand may not be the exact way it is. And a lot of times the parents have absolutely no idea about it. Like with Snapchat, the example I had on the screen, a lot of kids think it's gone forever, and we try to explain to them that no, it's actually in the internal memory of your phone, and actually Snapchat has a record of it. But unfortunately, in most of my dealings with Snapchats, where they will send subpoenas for the records, the pictures, whatever, they avoid disclosing any of that evidence. And that seems to be the case with a lot of the social media companies, Instagram, Facebook, all like that. They say, it's anonymous. They don't know, they can't track it. So it's definitely not helping in gathering the evidence for our cases, but letting teens know that those images and videos can be out there forever and they're shared with people beyond their control is a good reminder. There's also a mapping feature on Snapchat that you can turn off. You can turn to ghost. A lot of times the teens like for everybody to know where they're at or something like that, but showing them that they can change that. Sometimes just like their immediate need, their safeties. Do they need a different way home? Talking to them about 911, that they, if they have an extra cell phone around the house that's not hooked up, charge it. You can use that to call 911. Talking to them about the hotline. Excuse me. Each case is a little bit different on what they need for safety planning. We have some resources that are printed out that I can give them right then. But just kind of starting to open that communication and kind of see what they feel their safety issues are. We talk to them about safe and supportive adults, like you said, about the family demographics, finding out who's in the home for the child and for the non-offending caregiver, because they have a lot on their plate now. They're now dealing with law enforcement, and finding out who they have that they can trust, who can help them out. Sometimes when we're at these intakes, we know that law enforcement is not going to make an arrest at that time. We talk to them about an injunction. We have an FCA DV lawyer that's here that can assist them, plus FCA SV has a lawyer that can help us with filing those injunctions, and we go with them to the courthouse, help them with that, go to the hearing with them, but it's just, I tell them, unfortunately, it's just a piece of paper. So is your perpetrator one that will abide by the law? If they are, we go for the injunction. Even if they say they're not, maybe go for the injunction plus still do a little bit of that safety planning. So we work with educating both the caregivers and the teens, but the CPT at that interview, they're overwhelmed. They don't remember a lot of what we talk about. Most of the time, they don't even remember our name. When I call for my follow-up and I say my name, they're like, where did I meet you again? They meet so many people during this investigation. We do have a written safety plan that we provide them a copy of. And I'm just like, here, I'm just going to give you this, and you have a chance, look over it. Like I said, we give them our card that has our hotline numbers, my cell phone number. And I try to remind them at least twice that I'm there if they have any concerns. If they can't get me, reach out to the hotline, reach out to law enforcement if they're really concerned. Sometimes we've talked to them. We have local martial arts places that do self-defense classes. I've had one, it was Mom's Paramour, and he's like, I really think that she should take martial arts to make her feel empowered and to give her a little bit of self-defense. So those are options, reaching out in your community for some safety planning resources. So one of the things that's kind of new at our agency is a multidisciplinary team staffing. We call it our MDT staffings. So our agency just hired a dedicated MDT coordinator who's amazing. We basically tell her what our concerns are in a case and everybody that we know that's involved in the case, and she kind of runs with it at that point. She, within 24 hours, will schedule a date and time for the MDT staffing. And that's where, we all come together and talk about it. We're trying to really minimize the trauma and coordinate services. So DCF is involved. They have, they may be sheltered. You've got a DCF CPI, you have a case manager, you have a Guardian Ad Litem, you have CPT involved, your victim advocacy through our agency, and then if they've started therapy. And a lot of times it's hard for all these agencies to share information. A lot of agencies around here I found just kind of don't understand what we do and think we're just another layer. And so it's good to get the MDT for them to sit at the table and talk to you and understand, what your position is or what your role is in the case and how you can help them, and then to kind of fight for your families. One of the things that she does, her name's Miss Sherry, is she obtains old police reports. So she brings a lot of history for that case that a lot of times nobody else in that case knows about. She also is kind of our, here's the statutes that are relevant to this case. She schedules them and then she runs them for us so that we just have to give our input. At the end of them, she'll send out emails to everybody that, because everybody will have a chance to speak, and they will say what they're going to do. So there's that accountability, because Miss Sherry will send out an email that says, so-and-so said, or so-and-so will do such and such. So given that accountability, it just better coordinates services. In our area, we have a lot of services that are shared between Holmes and Washington County. And we don't, we're not all housed in the same building. Some cases we don't see some of the participants that we do in other cases. So it just helps to coordinate all those services. Some of the people that are involved in the staffing that we invite are the law enforcement agencies. And a lot of times with these being small towns, like I said, when I said Sherry starts pulling police reports, criminal reports, we find out that these families are involved with more than one law enforcement. Some of our law enforcement agencies work together great, and some of them kind of don't. So when we find out that two of them have been involved, it's good to bring them both to the table and, kind of let them share information as well. Your DCF CPI is involved. A lot of times that supervisor will be on the call. The CPT case coordinator, that's the person that did that interview, and they have a lot of the history of the case. We had one the other day that had 19 priors with the department. And a lot of times those CPIs are just busy. I don't think that CPI had read all of those 19 other reports. Your victim advocate, and that's us from the sexual assault program, the state attorney's office, the medical providers, like you saw on that one graphic where Kayla may have had a medical exam at the CAC. We have our own doctors in-house that'll come and they'll talk about what they saw during the medical exam or what concerns they have. And then your mental health providers, this can be our in-house T4 program, which is our trauma treatment therapy program, or it can be life management. I don't know what you guys have, but we have life management, Florida therapy, family first. We have about 6, I think, that work in each of our counties providing therapy and counseling. So bringing them to the table is good. So they'll have a better understanding of what this family's been through and what other services we might can put in the home to help them. This is a time we learn a lot about a family, and we might find out that they need more referrals, like I said, to the other mental health providers in the area. So with our agency, we have a requirement that once we meet the clients, whether it's at the hospital with our adult clients or whether it's during that CPT intake, all of our information has to be scanned and entered into a program called Collaborate. within 24 hours, and we put our referrals to therapy in as soon as possible. The CAC has a therapy program. We call them T4. It's Trauma Treatment Therapy Team, I believe. And they will get the referrals and they'll make contact within 48 hours to try to get those families in as soon as possible. And it's a very trauma intensive therapy. It's about 16 weeks. It also gives us a chance to provide follow-up to these adolescents and they're not offending every time they come to therapy, because our therapy program is housed in our offices. So if my clients come in Monday at 3 o'clock, I try to make a point to be here Monday at 3 o'clock just to say hey to them and see how it's going. Also gives us a chance to talk to the therapist and do a lot of staffings with them on how the child's doing. If there's any issues they see come up that we can help with. The follow-up contact is really great to build that rapport with the non-offending caregivers. They have somebody they feel like they can talk to. So we do that within 48 hours. But I try to, before that 48 hours when I make contact, I try to follow up with my law enforcement and find out what's going on. A lot of times the response I get is, I'm still investigating. And so I'll, just ask them, well, will you follow up with me when you find out? A lot of my investigators prefer to text. So they'll send me a text when they're a little bit farther along. They won't release reports in my area until they're completely done with it. So I just let them know that I need that report. That's one of our requirements that we have, is to get a copy of their report. We talk about the safety planning during the follow-up. That's when we might mention injunctions again. I give them a little bit more resources. If law enforcement has made an arrest, this is where I'll talk to them about VineLink and what VineLink is and how to register. I always offer they can come by the office and I will register for them. And we kind of just assess that case at that 48-hour mark and see where it's going. Do we need to call for a staffing and MDT staffing? Sometimes we'll know within 48 hours that we need one. Sometimes it's like a month later that we know that we need an MDT staffing, and we'll get that started. Try to do everything as quickly as possible, but a lot of it comes up after that. So some of the resources that I try to share with my clients are online support groups, in-house support groups. We offer support groups at each of our offices for the survivors and the non-offending parents or caregivers. Our therapy gives an option during intake that if the caregivers would like to participate in a separate therapy so that they can learn how to deal with that. That's one thing. Anna from Spark and Eva were very gracious to create some resource guides. I know Eva's already put a couple of them up. I have a couple of different resources that I'm going to send to Eva that she'll email out. And then like knowing your community resources, your mental health providers. We have a grant that's came down from DCF that's wraparound services. So literally they have, I'm not sure what they call them, if they're case managers or whatever, but they're assigned to a family and they wrap around them and help them. They'll transport them to therapy if there's a need. They just become a real good support system for them. And other mental health service providers in the area that we can refer to them. The trauma treatment therapy program that we have literally is for the trauma. So if there's already underlying mental health issues or anything that they need ongoing therapy for, we'll start working with them to get them referred to those. A lot of times the holdup is transportation and the pay source. So we'll work with them on those two things. Sometimes the resource they need is housing. They've had to leave the offender and they need somewhere to go. So we work on getting a list of those, call around, help them with all that different stuff. And so we have cases, our cases begin from the CPT and last at least through criminal prosecution. One thing we have really focused on, I feel like in the last 6 months, is working with the state attorney's office very closely. We send an email to the state attorney's office within 24 hours of that intake, letting them know that we are the victim advocate through our agency that has been assigned to the case, and ask them to make a note in the file. Apparently they have some sort of system for this, like a computerized system, as well as putting it in the paper file. They have a note. And then we track the cases through either public access. One of our counties actually has provided us access to the clerk of courts, but there's a public access in every county. So we track those cases, find out when the next pretrial is. We notify our clients of the pretrial and offer to go with them. Normally, if my clients are not going to pretrial, if I only have like one and they don't go, I'll just reach out to the state attorney's office and get an update. This also gives us a chance, like I talked about with law enforcement, building that now that we're doing the child case, we call them child cases, the adolescent and child cases, we see them so often that we're building a really good relationship with them, and they're calling us more on the adult cases and actually getting us involved in more cases because we see them more often. It's kind of happened with the state attorney's office too. I'm getting a lot of emails and phone calls from the legal assistant. Hey, can you help on this case? Or do you know who's on this case? Where before we were really having to chase down our cases and be like, hey, you know, is there a deposition coming up? Now when deposition subpoenas are created, I get a copy of them prior to the sheriff's department coming and knocking on my survivor's door. So I can give them a heads up. Hey, just to let you know, the sheriff's department will be by. I don't know if it's going to be today or it's going to be next week, but they're just bringing subpoenas for depositions. Remember, we've talked about depositions, and I will be there with you and I'll help prepare the child. So that's an important relationship. The more we're working with our state attorneys, they seem to be working with us a little bit more. They've actually increased. In Bay County, they're using the CAC, our umbrella agency, for all children. Not just, it used to be just children that come through our agency. Now any child that's a victim in a case will get an advocate from our agency. One of the things that we try to initiate is a meet and greet with the state attorney with our victims and our families. So they'll invite us to that. They'll let us know what's going on. And they kind of update the family on, without really spelling it out sometimes, what they're leaning towards. Like, you know, this is the evidence that I've seen so far. You know, how do you want this case to go? They do remind them that it's not really up to them, but it does give them a voice, like they are being heard. So when we're working really close, it gives us a chance to prep our clients for deposition and for trials. So we will meet with the client. I have one state attorney that has that CPT in the office, and she'll say, well, just come by here earlier and I've got an office you can use, and we allow the client to watch their CPT. But we also let them know what deposition is going to be like, what to expect, and that, you know, that we'll be there with them. I also go with the parents into depositions. And our trauma treatment therapists, they work with them on preparing them for deposition and trial too. To me, it's really important that the state attorney has made some attempt to build a relationship with the family through that meet and greet, just continuing to have connection or have conversations with me about what's going on so that I can relate to them, or a lot of them relay them directly to the family. The picture that you see on the right, that's what we call kids court at the CAC. That was actually, it's still there. It's a mock courtroom that is set up in our office in Panama City to walk our kids through and kind of explain, okay, your judge sits here, you'll sit here. Just kind of let them know what to expect. One thing that our agency is expanding on is we're getting service animals. So we will have one that will go with the clients to court. So what they will do is they will clear the courtroom of the jury. I call them puppies. The little puppies will come in. They will go under the bench or under the table right there that the clients sit at, and they can reach down and pet them. You know, they'll bring the jury back in. They'll give their testimony. They'll take the jury out. They'll take the dog out. You know, if they're comfortable and it emotionally it'll support them. That's one thing we're expanding to. We also take them to the courtroom, the actual courtrooms, and show them, you know, what the actual courtroom looks like. A lot of times the state attorney will go and do this with us, you know, kind of get down on their level and talk to them, explain to them who's going to be where, and, you know, some of the questions that might be asked. It's really hard. The trial's really hard for them to go through. Even deposition is really hard for them to go to. I have one room that they do deposition that has 2 doors. So I have figured out, you know, the back door leads right to the restroom. So if, you know, knowing things like that, knowing if your courtroom or your courthouse has a little room that you can use, make friends with your bailiffs. Your bailiffs know it all and really can hook you up with anything you need and try to make those kids feel at home. We really try to shelter the victims and the family as much as possible, and those bailiffs are a great asset. If they can find a small little space that you can that you can let them feel safe in. We have one courtroom that's very cold, so we have blankets for them. We just want them to feel as comfortable as possible. So as Eva mentioned earlier, we'll have another webinar. No, this is the Project Partners call, I'm sorry, that's coming up with Pamela Hope from the Putnam County Sexual and Domestic Violence Intervention and Prevention Program. She's graciously agreed to lead the next Rural Partners call via GoToWebinar. She's a registered clinical social worker and has completed her doctoral coursework for marriage and family therapy. She works tirelessly as an advocate for the rural Florida survivors and has a certification in play therapy that allows her to provide specialized therapy services focused on helping child survivors and sexual abuse recover from child survivors of sexual abuse recover from the trauma. The presentation will focus on providing services to adolescent survivors of sexual violence. And there's a link on FCASV's website for you guys to register for that. It's going to be really good. It'll be in 2 weeks. Well, thanks for joining us. Do you guys have any questions or comments, anything you'd like to discuss?
Okay, I'm looking, and you can raise your hand and I can unmute you if you'd prefer to speak, or you can go ahead and type that into the chat box and we'd love to hear from you. And I will add, okay, so is it where will a copy of this webinar be available? So if you're specifically asking about the PowerPoint is currently available under handouts. There are 3 handouts there. The PowerPoint called Rural Adolescent Survivors. We've also included online resources that we've put together for young adults and their loved ones. And I also uploaded during the presentation the Finding Your ACE score questionnaire. Eventually, a copy of the recording for this webinar will also be made available, and that will take a few days. So when I send out the follow-up email, I will make sure to include the recording, as well as the materials that are available on the panel. Oh, you're very welcome, Kaylee.
Thank you guys so much for bearing with me. I'm not a public speaker, but it is a big passion of mine, and I love our clients, our teenagers, and I think it's a great need that we had to work with them. So thank you guys for bearing with me.
No, you did amazing, and I think as advocates, a lot of us feel that way. So, well, I don't see any hands raised, and I don't see any further questions. But you do have Melissa's contact information, and you are. Hold on a second. I think I do actually see it. No, let me see. No hands. No
Cindy
hands.
did. I don't know if she still has something.
Cindy, let's see.
You mean to unmute her?
Here we go. Yeah, I can unmute her. Hi, Cindy. Cindy, you had your hand raised, so I've gone ahead. Oh, she may have typed it in. Okay, let's see.
Thank you, Miss Cindy.
She said, "Thank you, Melissa. You did a great job." So it was a comment.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Cindy.
And I'll be sure and have Eva put my contact information and my cell phone number. If I can be of help to any of you guys, please let me know. If I don't know the answer, like I said before, I'll try to find. I'm sure we have somebody that knows. If we get enough heads together, I'll be glad to help in any way I can.
And I am also here, even if it's for brainstorming. If you ever need to call, you can reach out to me as well through email or through phone. And I'll send out my contact information. Well, you'll have it because I'll be the one to email you the follow-up stuff. But our phone number here is 850-297-2000, and my extension is 113. All right. Well, if there's no further questions, I'm going to stop and end the recording here.